Mr. Rainwater.
Hey there, Jow.
Do you guys have reboots in comic books? As far as I know, it's just one story that keeps going.
No. It was really bad, actually, right before Disney bought Marvel. There was like this period of, it was a couple of years, and what would happen is, like, I think both Marvel and DC did this, but DC was particularly bad about it. Like almost every other year, they would restart the entire timeline. So the most like infamous moment in this was the New 52. I don't know if you ever remember hearing about that.
I've heard the words "the New 52." I never knew what it meant.
Yeah,
I thought it was like a multiverse thing or something, and then I was just like, I don't want to learn about this.
They rebooted everything, and so, and I mean like really reboot. So like they got writers to come on board to basically take all these big titles like Batman, Superman, et cetera, and sort of reconfigure them to fit into modern times. Like reconfigure their stories to fit into modern times. So like there's a run of Superman that is, I think it's written by Grant Morrison. I can't quite remember. I know that he did a run on Batman during that New 52 sprint. But Grant Morrison did a run where like Superman, he changed certain things about him. And this was after All-Star Superman, which I think is one of my favorite Superman comics ever. But like he like totally rechanged a lot of the aspects of the character of Clark. And then with Batman, like really redid a lot of stuff with Batman where there was like mystical aspects to it. There was like this whole thing where like Batman, I can't even remember all of it because like my friend tried to explain it to me and I was like, what the hell is going on? But anyway, like I said, the idea was they were just trying to refresh these comics because they were running into that, oh, these have been running as soap operas for like decades and had been amassing all these different continuity things that, you know, new writers would start to run into where it's like, oh, well, you can't do this with Bruce Wayne because decades ago he had some random issue where he had a run-in with this character, so you couldn't do that in this continuity. So they basically reset the ground so that they could just try new things with all the characters, which I can understand, right? Like when you're running, Marvel did something similar to that sort of when they did like the Ultimate series. It's like Ultimate Spider-Man. Was a series that was just like start anew, basically. So like you have a whole new, I mean, basically the same origin story, but it goes in different directions and it follows Spider-Man's path in sort of a different way. And when I say like Ultimate Spider-Man was where they go more into his relationship with Mary Jane and like they kind of follow him as he grows up and like gets divorced and all this other shit. In, you know, still having all the stand-ins as far are the regulars in terms of villains and stuff like that, but just taking it from a different perspective, which I think was, you know, they did that with Spider-Man, they did that with X-Men, they did that with a couple of properties for Marvel. However, it's been years. Like I was probably in college when they did that run. But they also, I know that at some point they also did the same thing that DC did, where they rebooted like the timelines. Because much as I suspect's going to happen with the movies over time as they get into all this multiverse bullshit, everything gets more and more burdened by too many different continuity lines and confusing storylines that your only choice really is to start everything afresh. And that's why I laughed at the beginning, because when I think about reboots in comics, like it is never done well. It's just not done well at all. And like I said, with DC had a particularly bad one because they did the new 52, which, by the way, the 52 is 52 new titles. So like they're like 52 new superheroes we're going to reboot. And there were, you know, I can't even remember all of the superheroes that they refreshed. Because they dug up superheroes you probably had never even heard of, you know? But it was like everybody in the Justice League and then some.
I'm at 15.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and even then, I was deep diving a little bit to things that some people listening to this probably don't know exist.
Like I said, that was a particularly infamous example, and it was, I think, for DC, sort of a signal that they were going in the wrong direction in a lot of ways, because they ended up restarting anyway later on. So once again, you know, when you go into the movies, you're kind of rebooting again, essentially. You know, like DC has been doing basically they've kind of rebooted a couple of times with their own, with the movies.
Well, with Batman most of all.
But yeah, definitely with Batman. Definitely. Didn't they do that with Superman?
Well, the Christopher Reeve line, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. But then you also have Superman Returns is set within the Christopher Reeve universe. So that's not necessarily a reboot as much as it's like a weird continuation, because it's supposed to take place after Superman 2, but before 3 and 4, or separate from 3 and 4. I don't know what it was. Doesn't matter because it didn't end up going anywhere anyway. And then you have Henry Cavill. That's it.
Right.
That's all that you have. So you really only have 2. So it's maybe done it once. Whereas Batman, theoretically, you could say Adam West had the first Batman movie.
Yeah.
Because he did. So that's the first movie. And then 89, the Michael Keaton films, one in 89 in Returns.
Yeah.
Technically, Forever and Batman and Robin are within the same timeline. I don't know if I wouldn't call it a reboot though, because they reset the tone. They don't acknowledge really anything from the past stuff. So I would kind of call that a soft reboot, whereas like, oh, it's still Batman, but it's not that Batman.
That is a particularly weird sort of sequel, because it's like events follow each other, but don't it's affect totally new characters. Like, it's odd.
Yeah. So we'll count that as a reboot. We'll say Forever and Batman and Robin are a new version.
I will say, like, you know, if you're gonna do a reboot, I think the freshest way that I've seen it done was in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies,
which gets a lot of flack. But to be honest with you, I enjoy it.
They're good movies overall, and then they also just acknowledge the original series and the original movies while doing its own thing, right? And to be like, hey, this is a different timeline, different universe, so things play out differently, although the characters are still the same. And while my main issue usually with multiverse stories is when the multiverses interact, because that's when you get all the hog shit. But like, if you want to just be like, hey, this is a different sort of scenario played out, or the same scenario played out in a different way, I'm cool with that. Like, I would prefer that if you're going to take a property and like refresh it, bring it back. I know an infamous example sort of is what do you call it? Like the monster movies that they were trying to bring back and they didn't quite make it.
No. Well, I mean, to be fair, the Invisible Man was okay. I don't know if you've seen the Invisible Man reboot.
Haven't yet. No, I haven't yet.
It's not as fun as the original Universal Monster, because like that movie's just fun. It's it's over the top. But this movie, it surprised me in the sense that there was some, instead of using science like biology to make himself invisible, this is more of a tech aspect of it, which, fits modern day, which is where they set it. They took advantage of the idea of, what would happen if someone was invisible and they were psychotic, in a good good way, not to its fullest potential in my opinion, but in various ways where it was like, so spoiler alert, at one scene, the lead woman is at dinner in a giant fancy restaurant with a whole crowd of people around, and she's explaining her theory about her ex-boyfriend, the Invisible Man, is invisible and, you know, terrorizing her and this and that. And all of a sudden, in the middle of a crowded restaurant, the steak knife sitting next to the friend rises into the air, cuts her throat, and then the lead character's hand gets pulled up and the knife gets put into her hand. And that type of shit was like, oh my God, like you just saw like a fucking murder in the middle of a restaurant, crowded restaurant with people. You know what I mean? Like it was very inventive with stuff like that. So I was able to appreciate it for what it was. I didn't like it more than the original, but but you know, it did what you're saying. It recontextualized the concept from a different angle, from the tech angle in a modern day thing.
Well, and I think that should be the idea. I think that should be the main thesis behind wanting to ever do a reboot, especially if you have something that it's been so long since it's been refreshed, you know, that you want to give it a new take. Like, I guess you could technically say like the Francis Ford Coppola movie, Bram Stoker's Dracula, is sort of rebooting of Dracula. It's such a different version of that story, right?
Yeah.
In the way that it's told, yet it's the same story. That's what's so interesting to me, is like you can have the same story told in such different ways. That's what should interest somebody in a reboot, not just like for pure nostalgic reasons, right? Like, I mean, The Force Awakens, another J.J. Abrams film, it's basically a reboot, right? It's basically a reboot of the first Star Wars movie, and it just doesn't go anywhere with it, really. It doesn't really. I mean, you don't get any of the new stuff until the later films, and most of the people don't like.
Even then, it's kind of a reach to call it newer stuff, because after the prequels, where do you go? Because the prequels really are the kind of reboot from a different angle, where it's like, oh, you know, here's the original series, which oddly enough I watched this afternoon, was about Luke Skywalker's rise from, you know, a reluctant young farm boy to, you know, the savior of the universe.
Sure.
Whereas the prequels was about a reluctant young farm boy who becomes the destroyer, the enslaver of the universe. So you already went through the other angle of it. So what's left? There's nothing there. There's no real other angle to come at Star Wars. You know, you came at it from the hero, and you came at it from the villain, and that's it.
You end up in the third series, you kind of come at it from as a fanboy, basically, which underserves the story, basically, from my opinion.
So now here's where I can actually say that this can be used correctly, though. The idea of being a fanboy in a reboot or remaking or rebooting a franchise. I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark and guess that you haven't watched the Friday the 13th series.
No, I haven't.
That's Jason Voorhees, the hockey mask one.
Yeah.
Unbelievably bad, in my personal opinion, for the first several films. Okay, maybe even all of them, to be honest with you. I haven't watched all of them myself. They are pretty generic slasher movies, and spoiler alert, Jason's not even the murderer in the first movie. He's barely in the first movie at all. I think he's just at the end, and in a flashback. But the rest of the time, it's his mom doing kills. But you never see her on screen, and da-da-da-da. The second movie in the Friday the 13th franchise, Jason Voorhees does not have his iconic hockey mask. He wears a burlap sack over his head with one eye cut out. And he walks around with an axe and he kills people, and that's it. The third movie is where he finally gets the hockey mask, but he's just a guy. And he's,
I think I did watch one where like he comes back as a demon and possesses people's bodies or something like that.
That's Jason Goes to Hell, where he's like a little like worm or something that comes out of their mouth. And That's later. That's later. Because I think in 4 he gets killed by a little Tom Savini wannabe. And then in 5 they do an imposter thing where some killer guy dresses up like Jason and you don't know that it's a guy dressed up like Jason doing the killing. And then in the one after that they bring Jason back from the dead. And the one after that where they bring him back from the dead, from what I've been told, is supposed to be really influenced by like Universal Monsters type atmosphere and kind of stuff, which I'm looking forward to eventually getting around to watching. But either way, you have like 7 movies before this thing gets its fucking on track. Which in some cases is great for a franchise to kind of spread the wealth over movies and build.
Yeah,
in a horror movie, it's like, get to the fucking point. Like, let's iconize. What's the word I'm looking for? Create some iconography right off the bat.
Yeah.
In the Friday the 13th reboot, done by Michael Bay of all people, he was a producer, not director. The lineage, the mom being the killer, is the opening sequence in like a flash, almost like a flashback type sequence in between the opening credits. The first maybe, no, I take that back. The opening scene of the movie is like a 20-minute short film. It's crazy. Where Jason is wearing the burlap sack on his head. Then they go to the flashback sequence during the opening credits, 20 minutes into the movie, where they flash back to Jason's mother being the killer and what happened with his drowning and all this kind of stuff. Then they cut back to present day and the opening group of kids that get killed in the first 20 minutes, and there's literally a group of kids. One of them's brother is searching for them. And Jason, within the first act of the movie, goes from being Mr. Baghead to Hockey Man. So in the first half of the movie, you cover the first film, the second film, the third film, and you create a character who grows over the course of the film. New things are happening, interestingly enough. So they're paying homage to the things that came before, but also, and this is in the 80s, and no one gave a shit about continuity in the Friday the 13th series.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they were able to ground it in a believable way where it's like, oh, this is what happened. This is how he started. This is how he's growing. This is how he's moving on. This is da-da-da-da. And it actually makes for, in my opinion, the best Friday the 13th movie I've seen. And I've seen a couple of them. I know I haven't seen all of them, but I'm guessing, Jason Takes Manhattan is not going to be a 5-star movie.
There's one where he goes to space as well.
I actually like Jason X for its campiness.
And I'm kind of, after watching Jason Goes to Hell, I'm kind of interested now because those movies seem to really bake themselves into being sort of shitty. Like, there's a certain amount of awareness in how shitty they are.
Not in the beginning. They take themselves very seriously. I mean, it starts off as an 80s slasher and then it kind of, delves into schlock.
I kind of like when movies get really self-aware and then do silly shit like that.
To some extent, I do too, but I also appreciate how they were able to bring it back to its grounded, you know what I mean? Like its roots when they did a reboot and they were like, because I mean, I guess that's how you can pull off that reboot where it's serious, where if it hadn't delved into schlock and camp and over the top meta self-awareness, you would be tired of the seriousness. So it had to go there. But it was one of those situations where it was really good that they were able to take that fanboyness to make my point of all the things that were great that were littered throughout several movies and condense it into one to make one above average, really good movie, in my opinion.
So, and we're making a distinction between a reboot and a remake, right? Because I feel like those are kind of two separate ideas.
I would agree. What would you define them as?
I immediately started thinking about, because they did a RoboCop remake, right, not that long ago, and then like a Total Recall remake, right? And there was like a couple of different sci-fi movies they remade, and I can't remember all of them, but those two in particular. they're not reboots because they don't follow a particular continuity. They're just telling the story again. So I guess what I was saying about Bram Stoker's Dracula, that's really just a remake and not a reboot, right? That's
well. Wait, we're differentiating between remake and reboot. What are your definitions for each of them?
A reboot then would be reboots frequently. Reboots I often see take the same continuity and then adjust it, or like there was what was that popular term in the aughts? I think it was retcon, which was like basically the idea of you go back and retroactively just change certain things in the story while maintaining the same storyline overall, right?
Yeah.
And that's usually the idea behind a lot of reboots is you want to take all the things you liked from the original, transport them over into the new thing, and then add your own stuff onto it. Whereas a remake is like you're totally reinterpreting the property, right, or the story, and you're giving it your own spin.
So you would say that the new Scream movie was a reboot?
Yeah, I would say that because the new Scream movie still takes all the stuff from all the previous Scream movies, right?
But they also created that Billy Loomis has a daughter, which was never even alluded to in any other thing. If anything, there's massive support, and understandably so, that he might have been secretly homosexual. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't understand why he would be banging another chick.
It's not remaking any of the story. It's still, you could still interpret it as a continuity of the Scream movie.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's not. That isn't contingent on it being enjoyed as a film.
So that's a reboot, but you would call the Rob Zombie Halloween's a remake.
Yeah,
where it's basically the exact same story done executed in a different style.
Exactly.
Okay. So that makes sense. I would agree with that.
And I think that once again, it's two different ways of trying to tell a story, right? And it's or retell a story, I guess. And it's interesting because it's hard to figure. For me, like I personally, like if I were asked, right, to tell or to write a script for like a reboot.
Trailer Park Warlock.
Well,
what if they come to you and say, in 10 years, they say, Rainwater, we want you to reboot your own thing?
Oh, I would probably, That's an interesting question. Yeah, I probably would reboot it, actually, because I've actually already thought about that.
What you would do differently, or what you would change and continue
I've thought about if I did the story over, what I would change to make things more thematically whole. And then also, over the course of writing that story, I progressed a lot as an artist, in the sense that I'm almost I feel like, to me, it's almost unrecognizable from where I started. And over the time of my progression, I've learned all these new tricks and things that I wish I had at the beginning of writing Trailer Park Warlock, because I could add subtlety and nuance that later on I started adding into character designs and character acting that weren't there previously.
Wouldn't you call that more of a rewrite than a reboot or a remake?
Yeah, it's definitely a rewrite when it's the original artist coming back at it, a lot of ways. Although did the original writer of Scream do the most recent movie?
No, he didn't write it. He was brought back on as an executive producer, and I believe that he gave his blessing on the script. He also gave notes and advised them. It was like, oh, you need to change this or do that or blah, blah, blah. But he didn't start it from scratch. He didn't do anything like that. But I think he had a big influence on it, though.
So yeah, it would definitely be a rewrite, and I have thought about things that I would want to rewrite. And it's interesting they bring that up, because I'd actually I listened to I guess a live stream of somebody who was launching their webtoon, and they were talking about the story that they're doing, whose name escapes me currently. I'm sad to say. I think it's Shadow. Oh my God, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, point is, I'm just gonna look up the title while I just explain. She was relaunching her webtoon, and it was like the third or fourth retelling of that story.
By her?
Yes, because every time, like, she started in high school, and when she did in high school, it was just like, you know, pages that she was probably drawing. I don't remember what she said, but I'm in my imagination, I think it was like pages she was drawing in her notebooks and stuff. And like started posting on it's okay, so the webtoon's called Light Within Shadow for people who want context. You can check it out on Webtoon. But anyway, so she started that, posting it on DeviantArt. Then she started posting it on Webtoon as she relaunched it on Webtoon, and then she relaunched it again on Webtoon. So each time there was stuff that she didn't like, that she wanted to remake, and then she was just trying to like make the story better and better. And I mean, I don't have context for what her art looked like at that point, but looking at her art now, she definitely is like at professional level, you know, because she's come back at it so many different times. I personally have never done that.
I couldn't.
It would be really hard for
me. If you came to me and asked me to redo Digits right now, I would smack you across the face, kick you in the nuts, and walk away. Like, I couldn't do it. Like, it's not even because Digits is not a perfect movie. When I watch it now, I look at it and I go, oh, I should have made an edit there. Oh, I should have, you know, angled that shot better. Oh, I should have fixed the light or da-da-da-da-da. There's a million little nitpicks that I could do. But in terms of if you asked me to start from day one and reshoot the entire thing or even just rewrite the script or whatever, I don't want to do it because I feel like I did it. It's done. It's out there. It is what it is.
That's
and I'd like to move forward. Like, because I don't know, like we've talked about this before, but I like variety. I like different things. And I don't like, for a while there, I wanted to do digits too. And I think that was more from a fear of abandoning what was working for something that might not, which is not a good thing for an artist. I think you need to, it's like Spider-Man. You need to shoot the next web and let go of the one you're holding on to before the web catches onto whatever you're going to swing on. I think that's where an artist thrives personally.
Sure.
But I just couldn't do it. Even now, like I've finally gotten to the end of like a rewrite on Haunted. And I don't even know if I want to call it perfect, but I know that I've reached a personal milestone where I feel like this is the best I'm going to do. And I don't think I've ever said that about the script where I looked at it and go, yeah, I can do that. Like, cause it was always, I could do this better. I'll just give me a couple of days and I'll come back to it and I'll be able to fix it. Like every time I've gone back and opened the script and reread it, I've been like, no, that's what it needs to be. That's good. That's what I can get to. So the idea of revisiting anything of mine, couldn't do it. Wouldn't want to do it. It would physically, I can feel my stomach churning right now. It makes me sick to think about that. I don't know about you, but like, I mean, hats off to her for being able to do that, but I couldn't.
It would be difficult to do. I have thought about, you know, in some hypothetical future, like me in Austin working on a rewrite of Garage Raja, it would be totally different. Like, it'd be totally different from what we were making at that time. And I, you know, when I do think about it, lately, as of now, I'm kind of getting to this point where it's like, I just kind of want to do new stuff, you know? Like, I kind of just want to, and especially because I'm getting particularly interested in sort of developing a storied universe out of Trailer Park Warlock. We'll see where that goes, you know, over time.
The Rainwater Cinematic Universe?
Yeah, the Rainwater Cinematic Universe. We'll see where that goes after Trailer Park Warlock. But, you know, it's a possibility. It is also a possibility, like you were saying, you know, I could be in a position where I am rewriting Trailer Park Warlock as an animated series. But if it's like a different, to me, it's like if it's a different medium, you have to approach it differently and with different expectations. I can't approach animation the same way that I would approach a comic book or a prose novel or anything like that.
I think adapting to a different medium allows for not necessarily for rewrites, but for redos or reinterpretations by an artist. And I think that is something that can refresh. If you told me right now, Jow, I want you to remake Digits, and I told you I'd start getting sick, and then you finished your sentence with, as a classical painting, I want you to get acrylic and get a fucking canvas, and I want you to paint Digits as a one picture painting. Then I'd be like, that's actually, I could sign up for that. Like, that's interesting to me. Like, how would I do that? How would I take the entire movie, the theme, the characters, the story, the idea of it? How would I put that into a Renaissance style painting? And that sounds exciting to me. Like, I would be like, all right, I'm game.
Yeah, I mean, what about as a sitcom, you know? Like as a...
That's a little close.
It's too close for you.
Because, well, I mean, if I hadn't shot... well, see, I would... okay, it's close, but it's not perfect because Digits, for those of you who are listening who haven't seen it, which is mostly probably everybody, was shot mockumentary style, which means it's like a fake documentary. If I were to do it like a TV show, that would be way too close to like The Office. So I would 100% either shoot it like a sitcom, like Big Bang Theory or Roseanne or The Connors or whatever.
Oh, you know, that makes sense to me too. Why when they did the Clerks TV show was animated, because I think it was as a way to sort of differentiate, you know, in terms of style, in terms of, because if you did it as a TV show, people would just be like, oh, this doesn't look like the movie, right? But when you have it as an animated show, you draw distance from that, and then you allow it to actually sort of seep into its own particular rhythm and vibe. So it doesn't compete with the movie, basically.
Yeah. And you really take a risk there by isolating your audience. Do you know what I mean? Like that because they come with an expectation now.
Sure.
Especially if you're the creator.
I think it personally, it probably mitigates the risk of alienating the audience more if you would have just gone live action and then it's like, oh, this is the shitty version of Clerks. Right?
Yeah, like, with a less of a production budget. Yeah, absolutely. Well, not that they had one to begin with, but yeah.
Because I think there was in the 90s, there was a string of a couple of like television shows that were based off of movies. And they were frequently not as successful, although some were. I mean, Stargate, to my surprise, it's actually a decent show, even though the production on it is not as good as the original movie, right? But you just have to sort of accept that and go with it, and then it's vaguely enjoyable. You know what I mean? Right. But there is always that aspect where it's like, oh, this feels watered down compared to the original version.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. That to me, it's like going back to the well. You know what I mean? And damn it, like 10 years ago, as just starting out as an artist, I would have said to you, yeah, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. But now I'm back to the point, because, you know, when you're a starving artist where, you know, you're just desperate to get anything done. Now, having done some stuff, I think I would rather starve for a little while than go back to the well. I really do feel that way. I feel like it's kind of like when they say, oh, if you need $1 million to get your movie done, you should only take like 700,000, because that putting you in that box will push you creatively. Whereas I feel like if you don't go back to the well for something that you've already been successful at, you'll be more likely to succeed in your next endeavor, or at least find some fulfillment, because you took a chance on something else. But then again, that's just me. I'm just, you know what I mean? Like, that's my preference as an artist, is that variety. Like, I don't know, it's going to be and this has been my hardest problem, because at the moment I'm in the process of working on beating out, I should say, Cemetery Sweethearts. That's a rom-com, and Digits was a rom-com. And I'm having a little bit of an issue not doing the same thing. You know what I mean?
Sure,
like it's a little bit of a challenge to not have that same dynamic, but like I already found it where it's like the guy's friends hate the girl, and you know what I mean? Like he's trying to and I'm finding myself, I'm like, I'm just remaking Digits as a fucking Halloween graveyard romance. Like,
well, that's the thing though, is themes. I mean, pretty much every artist will unconsciously replay themes in their stories.
True. Very true.
And I think that's awesome because that's what they're trying to work out on a personal level.
Working out their shit.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely theme. It's not obvious necessarily, but there are themes in Trailer Park Warlock that carry over from Garage Raja that I didn't even become aware of until I'm like deep in the middle of it. And I'm like, oh shit, this is kind of similar to stuff that I was dealing with in that story. But like, I'm probably always going to be doing different variations on that throughout my life, or at least until I've resolved whatever it is that I feel like I need to get resolved in telling a story,
Absolutely.
I've seen, I mean, there are some writers that's their entire work completely. Like, I think a year ago I went through like all of Ayn Rand's books. It's all the same story over and over again, just from slightly different like perspectives, basically. And it's all kind of based on her trauma, having grown up in what would become the Soviet Union and dealing with like the revolution that destroyed her life, like the life of the place where she was growing up. So, she moves to America and like basically she sees herself as a writer, as somebody who's just wanting to warn Americans of like, don't let this happen to you. And that's like every single one of her stories is just kind of revisiting that trauma over and over again from different perspectives and in different philosophical tones. Like The Fountainhead is a more satirical take on it and more intimate as a story, and I would actually recommend that story if you're ever going to even deal with an Ayn Rand story, if you're willing to sit down to like 1,000-page Eastern European style novel. But like while Atlas Shrugged is like this kind of insane science fiction novel that is also hundreds of pages of philosophical and political rhetoric that it doesn't need to be in a book. So anyway, point is like I feel like this is pretty typical of artists in general. They have a theme that they're latched onto throughout life, and they're always trying to find ways to reboot that theme, but from different angles, different perspectives, different say it in a different way, because that is it's like their perspective, right? Their perspective is colored by their trauma or their past, their memories, the things that they're nostalgic about, whatever, it to a certain level it can't be helped. Another example of this would be the most recent glut of like games by From Software. So they've made these games called originally it was called Dark Souls. I think that was the very first game. And they made 3 Dark Souls games. They're all the same game. They all have the same like thematics. It's all about like you're kind of this ghost person who kind of keeps getting reincarnated, and you're trying to explore this world. And every time you die, you learn a little bit more about the world, and you grow a little bit and get more powerful. And there's always some terrible Cthulhu Lovecraftian thing going on in the background of every story. And anyway, From Software then did like Bloodborne, which is literally just those games but with a different title. Like, and they focused maybe a little bit more on the Cthulhu stuff. And then they did a most recent title called Elden Ring. Pretty much the exact same game, but this time they got George R.R. Martin to come on and write the scenario and come up with some stuff about this guy named the Dung Eater. But it's the same game. It's like every single one of those games are the same game. And people love them. It's kind of bizarre to me because by the time I finished playing Bloodborne, I was like, I'm done. I've played this game. I'm good,
Yeah.
But people, that I find kind of interesting, because to me it would be, and I think this is sort of what you're getting at with returning, the whole thing about returning to the well. I feel like I would get bored after a while.
Right.
Like,
absolutely.
At the same time, there must be some kind of release that comes from having that format set up from the beginning, and you're just like, all right, we're figuring out how to do this format in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Mario Brothers games, 1, 2, and 3, to Super Mario World, all 2D platformers. They're not. I mean, there are changes from game to game, right? Usually they're changes in complexity, but after a while, like after Super Mario World, it's like, we don't know what else to do with 2 dimensions. We've kind of done everything we could do with 2 dimensions. We need a new dimension. And so you had Super Mario 64, which was completely different from everything at that point. Like, there wasn't a game like that once that game was made, because it was just a whole other different way of interacting with the video game world. And it's interesting because that's kind of an issue that's happening with video games in general right now, is that 3 dimensions have been kind of explored very fully throughout all the games that have been made since Super Mario 64. There aren't really any new ideas for platforming games coming out recently. There aren't really any new ideas for first-person shooter games. It's all kind of just like, in fact, it's been so fulfilled that now the thing is like looking backward and figuring out ways of redoing older games. So video game design has actually hit this point where they need to find a new dimension to fuck around in order to make games interesting again. And until then, I think that you're gonna see people lose interest in video games to a certain extent in lieu of, real life experiences, quite frankly, going to music venues and stuff like that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Don't you think that the newest reboot, and it didn't catch fire, and I have a theory as to why, but the newest iteration of the video game was like VR, right? Like, wasn't that what they were really trying to do, was kind of move it into that like a legitimate first person perspective?
I thought for a second that VR might take off, but it really isn't happening, even though there's a lot of money being poured into it. Not that many people are playing VR games at the same time want to retain a certain level of having games that aren't VR games and having that level of separation. Because I think right now what's going on is,
for the record, they try to do it with movies too. They try to do VR
that
movies.
That didn't go anywhere either, as far as I'm aware.
And I'm salty about it because I lost a screenplay competition to a VR script once, and I was like, this is fucking bullshit. Anyway.
It was like, well, they tried 3D for a little. They tried 3D movies for a hot minute, and it didn't really take off because it's not enough of a level of additional immersion to make people like for it, right? Like, the kind of entertainment right now that people are going for is really more towards live streaming stuff. If you want to talk about digital, like, entertainment, stuff like Twitch and TikTok and YouTube live streaming, they all have a certain level of social interactivity that it's better than Facebook and Twitter and other social media like that, because you're actually having like one-to-one interactions with people, and it can actually see them respond to what you're saying. So automatically people are surprisingly more friendly to each other, which creates more of a long-term, like, communal rapport. And that in itself, like I'm not big on a lot of Twitch streams, but I see the appeal. I see why people are hanging out on Twitch streams, because it is this interesting middle ground between, if you're somebody you don't have anybody to hang out with, well, you can at least go hang out on this Twitch stream where somebody's playing, I don't know, like Elden Ring or something for about 3 hours, and you can ask them questions and they can respond to your questions. And you're talking with other people in the chat and y'all are getting along, you know?
Yeah.
That's a communal experience that otherwise you would not have. I guess you could have that in MMORPGs, like in multiplayer online RPGs like Warcraft or whatever. But those aren't very popular right now. Like people have kind of burnt out on them because they're boring games from my personal perspective. But like, I think right now the thing that people are missing, especially after COVID, is social interaction, and they want social interaction in as deep and intimate a way as possible that isn't going to be provided necessarily through VR experiences, or at least not on the same level that they might get like hanging out on a Twitch stream. And also, a Twitch stream is free, and a VR headset is usually pretty fucking expensive.
Which was my theory that I didn't mention as to why VR never took off, was because they sapped that thing with so much cost, and everybody's like, wait a minute, the PS5 cost how much? And I need a 4K TV, and I need, how much is this HDMI cable for this? Great. And now I got to up my internet because of this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was just way too much it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't
think VR is going to take off until there's some way, I don't know how they could do this, but until there's some way that you could have a 1-to-1 simulation of life. Because there's not, like, the appeal of a video game is you can do things that you couldn't do in real life.
Right.
But
which is why they tried VR porn.
That's kind of ultimately what I'm getting to here, is like, you're not going to have that mass adoption point until you can have a situation where you can have basically real life experiences over the internet. You know what I mean? I don't think that there's enough of a pull for somebody to put on a VR headset and like trip over their ottoman in their living room just to play a game that they could play on a controller and not trip over an ottoman in their living room.
Right.
It's not enough of a level of immersion versus like if you could be Mario and hold the mushroom in your hand and feel the mushroom in your hand and have the feeling of yourself growing into a giant and like, you know,
you have to wear a whole fucking suit for that.
Sure.
You know, like,
or who knows? Like, this is a very speculative technology that doesn't exist right now. I mean, there's haptic technology kind of to a certain extent is able to mimic sensation. But as far as I'm aware, it's by having kind of machine pressures that push on your body and stuff. So I've never tried haptic technology, but I feel like it would be interesting but awkward. And I feel like it would be like 8-bit sensation, if that makes sense. Which, hey, you know, there's definitely the potential of that taking off. You got to start somewhere. It's just, I think that I don't know. I think that there's too much of, like, real life is too free. Like, it doesn't cost anything. It's too free. It doesn't cost anything.
Okay.
To make virtual reality worth that step at the moment. That's my take on it, is that why would I go? Actually, I could see the appeal of this, but like I was about to say, why would I go to a virtual reality Kanye West concert when I can go to it in actual real life? But I can see the potential for that, right? Like if
I could, because I hate the fan base, but I love the music.
So like there are venues where that could be useful. I just don't think they're in 3-dimensional spaces right now. What I mean is in computer generated spaces.
Right. Yeah, I got what you mean. Yeah.
Like if there was like, you know, you could put your headset on a drone or a camera or something and be in a physical space and look at it from that perspective, there's a huge appeal for that.
Sure.
There's a huge appeal for that right now. I just can't afford it. So like
that's fair. So anyway, dialing back to reboots and remakes, I don't know how we got on a
virtual reality is the remake of actual reality.
Of reality, yeah.
That's the segue.
I had a question for you, which was if you were you are an artist, but if you were an artist that were asked to do a reboot for some kind of a property, what would you do? Like, how would you approach doing someone else, like a reboot of somebody else's work? And if off the top of your head, if you have something in mind that you wish you could actually tackle, you feel free to mention it. But I'm just curious about the process that you think you would take.
I'm thinking really hard about what property would it be, because that gives me sort of
that would define the process that you use.
Yeah, that would define the process that I would use. Like if it were something, let's say, I'm trying to think of like a video game property or something. Like if somebody asked me to make a video game movie, right? Like let's say The Legend of Zelda, right? Somebody like Nintendo has come to me to ask me to make a live action, just to make it more complicated for me, a live action Legend of Zelda game or movie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, first of all, I have to figure out, I would approach it from the perspective of like solving a problem, because that is a problem. Like if it were animated, I think that would be easier, but if it were live action, I suddenly have the problem of having to make a translation between something that started as Unreal and then making it believable and real, right? Within the framework of like, we want you to hire, I was going to say Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise could have been a great Link in the 80s. I mean, I don't know. He doesn't really age, so maybe he could still do it. He doesn't have to talk either. That's the other part about that.
Does he have to run? That's like in the contract.
Yeah, we can make that work. This could actually be great. He doesn't have to talk because Link doesn't talk. That's actually something I would keep in the movie, as I would be very faithful to the games in that sense, where Link never talks, and everybody kind of just responds to him. And I think that would make for an interesting character dynamic, right? And then I would keep it simple in the sense of keep the story simple and make it more about having. Go ahead.
I want to stop you.
Yeah.
Because what you're describing is adapting. You're adapting from one to a different medium. You're not rebooting or remaking.
I feel like remaking and adapting are in the same spirit, though.
Wouldn't they be the same medium, though? Isn't that the differential between it, though?
Yeah, that is a differential for sure.
That's the differential, is that a remake or a reboot is still within the original medium.
Okay, well then let's step back. Like if I'm asked to remake Zelda as a video game.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
That makes sense. I would first have to look at all the previous Zelda video games just to figure out like what's already been done, you know?
Right.
I can remember most of them because I've played a lot of them, but there's a fair amount that I haven't played because I haven't had the time to. But I would play I'd either play or at least watch like some video game recaps or whatever those games to understand like where have audiences been in these games, so that I can figure out where to go that they haven't been, what hasn't been done within that space, and adapt it to like what are the most effective iterations. So like I think one of the most popular versions of the Zelda games, and I haven't played it yet, is Breath of the Wild. And one of the reasons why people like it is it's open world. Like you're not told where to go. You can just start exploring wherever you want from where you start. And it allows you to experiment and try out things and just sort of live in the world and play in it as you want. I want to play Breath of the Wild because it reminds me of one of my favorite Zelda games, which is number 2. What the hell is it called? It was Zelda 2 on the NES. I can't remember the subtitle for it, but it's also an open world game. It's super hard because they don't tell you shit about what where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do. You just have to figure it out. And it's a very challenging game, and I would want to make it a challenging game, like the remake or the remake, I guess, or the reboot, whatever you want to fucking call it. Because I like challenging games, right? And I would want to I think I would probably make it a very humorous game. Just because I like humor, you know. I think that's something also that is often severely missing in a lot of modern media in general, you know. I'm trying to think what else, because there are certain things within the Zelda game that you kind of have to stick to in terms of formula. Right. Like Ganon usually has to show up at some point in time, and if you don't have Ganon show up, you've got to make the villain means something in some way that is thematically nuanced and different from Ganon. The villain has to, you know, if it's a different villain, they have to represent sort of a different opposition and a different goal, essentially. I'm trying to think what else here. But yeah, I guess that's sort of where I would start from, you know? Like, I would certainly want the game to have a stamp on it that was like, oh, this is very different from all the other Zelda games. And part of my way of thinking about that too is sort of be like, you know, it might be how I think Rian Johnson approached
The Last Jedi.
Yeah, Last Jedi, where it's like, oh, they're gonna regret doing this. Like, I often feel that way as an artist, where I'm just like, sometimes when I'm offered opportunities, I just kind of like the feeling of like, oh, they're gonna regret doing this because I'm gonna do so much weird shit. Like, they're not gonna like.
That's fair. I always thought if I ever did a reboot of anything, it would be Dracula from 1932.
I would love to see that. I would love to see, just in general, more different ways of telling that story, because there's so many different perspectives in the original book, you know?
Well, that's the thing, is that the 1932 movie's not based on the book.
Yeah.
The 1932 movie is based on the stage play, which was a loose adaptation of the book. Yeah. To me, I would want to remake that particular movie. Okay. Not an adaptation of the original book. I would want to remake that movie, the Lugosi, Van Sloan type thing or whatever, black and white. Not so much have it be very stagey where it's like it looks like a stage play, but I would want to do black and white, like grayscale, like old school. The only thing I think I would change, I think I would do a 235 aspect versus the 4:3 that they had. That way it's a little bit more of a wider screen. And I think really what I would do is I would keep, in contrast to what you were talking about, where you do stuff like drastically different. I think a lot of my stuff would be very similar to the original, almost kind of like how what Gus Van Sant did with Psycho, where he remade Hitchcock's movie shot by shot. I would do something very similar to that. The only difference that it would be overall, I mean, obviously different actors, but the big thing that I would change is, I don't want to say, because it kind of did. In 1932, they kind of had their teeth pulled away from them, literally. Dracula doesn't have fangs, right? That wasn't a thing. You never actually see him murder anybody. It always like fades out, or it cuts away, or it happens off screen or whatever. That's the only thing, is that mine would be like, I don't want to say ultra violent, but it would be a lot more shocking.
You would shy away from the violence.
No, I would definitely put it on screen, because in my opinion, the birth of the genre of horror was supposed to horrify you.
Yeah.
And if, you know what I mean? Like, so the idea of someone, and this is something that is very prevalent within horror itself, even to this day, you can do the worst things ever. You can, like, I don't know, I highly doubt you watched the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie from this year that came out on Netflix.
No, I haven't seen it.
Okay, at one point, they take the original final girl from the original movie. It's a different actress because the original actress passed away. But they take the character, right, and they have her go up against Leatherface, the guy with the chainsaw, and he literally stabs her through the stomach with the chainsaw and lifts her above his head on the chainsaw, revving the chainsaw through her, cutting her in half, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is pretty gory and disgusting.
Yeah.
Here's the kicker. She dies instantly, right?
Yeah.
It's allowed. What they're not allowed to do in horror movies, which I plan on doing in Haunted and plan on doing, would do in a Dracula remake that I would do. You're not allowed to let characters, people, suffer. That's what they don't like happening. To me, watching someone suffer as an audience member, feeling helpless, is horrifying.
Oh yeah, and I feel like that's part of what makes Dracula horrifying as a character, because in the books, like, or in the book, like, part of the horror that everybody's experiencing is like all the shit like Mina's going through as she's becoming more and more sort of possessed, right?
Right.
By
Yeah.
Dracula. And like, you know, like her I can't remember if John is married to her at that point or if they're still just fiancés, but
I think they're still fiancés. Yeah,
you're still like, you're going through the horror of John experiencing this and Van Helsing, like, just you get all those different perspectives and you sort of get who Van Helsing and John are as characters, because Van Helsing's just trying to like solve this problem while also experiencing horror because he's compassionate, right? He's like, he has that doctor aspect to him where he's like, I want to heal, I want to help this person.
Yeah.
But trying not to be taken in by the emotional impact of it. And that's definitely, you get a little bit, I think you get a little bit of it. You don't get it, I don't feel like you get so much of it in the original movie.
Right.
It's more sort of driven by the plot. I think in Coppola's interpretation, you get some amount. I mean, Keanu Reeves does not do the best job of evoking
No.
Jonathan Harker's like horror at what's happening, but like you know, Anthony Hopkins does a pretty decent job of sort of evoking it, and
a little bit,
get a sense of like he can imagine the suffering that's happening, and then you as the audience member starts to imagine it too, and so that's because the idea of being sort of possessed, right, by a malevolent, like monster, spirit, whatever, is a scary idea.
Absolutely.
Like, I think, you know, like The Exorcist does that in like a very good way.
Yes.
Just like, because it's from the perspective often of the parents, and you're like, holy shit, if I was in that position, what the fuck would I do? You know, how would I not faint? You know, like the
idea of making an audience member feel helpless is what excites me about a horror film. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know why it's coming from, and you don't know how to escape it. That's the trifecta of horror.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What, why, how? Those three questions need to be unanswered in any horror film. And you can allow people, and people will be horrified because they don't, you know what I mean? You have to have a context enough that they're educated as to, you know, that the characters they're watching are in fact helpless, but you also have to understand that what is going on to some extent. It's a delicate balance. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise you can lose them entirely. But if you can find that sweet spot with all those things, people will walk away fucking scared out of their minds. And that to me is horror. That is what horror is not about, you know, oh, he got chainsawed into the air and cut in half. Yeah, it's a gruesome thought, but at this point in cinema and the experience of moviegoers, you know, we've seen that. It's not like, you know, we've seen behind the curtain. Movie magic has been completely obliterated in the modern day. Like, they tell you how to do everything. You can go on YouTube and look up a tutorial on how to After Effects that like tomorrow. And it's not that scary anymore. But the idea from the story standpoint, if you can hit those things, you will find horror again. And that's what I would want to put back in Dracula if I was doing like a remake.
I think that's what made like Get Out such an effective horror movie was that it really captures that sense of helplessness, right?
Right.
Where it's just like the main character is put in this position where there's almost nothing that he can do at a certain point.
Yes.
Like he doesn't know how to get out of it. And so that's a really, like you're saying, I think that's a great way of putting it. Terror, basically. The sense that you're not in control.
Yeah. And that to me is what that's what I think is missing. That's why I think a lot of people in modern audiences, like if you got like a 20-year-old and trying to show them, 1932 Dracula, they'd be like, this shit is boring. Like, I don't get who cares? The atmosphere is great to someone like me. Like, I appreciate it for that. But if you're going looking for a horror movie or whatever, like, it's not going to do the trick. And back in 1932, abso-fucking-lutely. Yeah. Now, not so much. Same thing with Frankenstein. People weren't, the idea of reanimating a dead body that you stitch together from various corpses was frightening to some people when they went home. You know what I mean? Like, they got legitimately scared by it. And we laugh at those people now, but we are privileged to live in a world where those kinds of stories are abundant to the point where we've become desensitized to them.
Well,
that's why.
What's funny, too, is the things that are horrifying to me now are when real life starts to mimic, like, art, like the art world, basically. Because I just read an article not that long ago about how scientists were able to revive dead cells in I think it was in the retina. So like there are these eye cells within the eyeball, they were able to reactivate, and so they were sending like electron signals that would usually go to the brain. So like that, when I read that, I had this like pit in my stomach feeling. Because I was thinking about like literally all the things that kind of creep me out about the story of Frankenstein, right? The idea of like having died and then coming back to life. And what the fuck is that like? Because then your body's like not, it's not your original body.
Oh yeah.
Like
that's idle hands type shit.
Yeah. It's not like anything with the brain just starts to creep me out to think about, because we're all so used to like inhabiting our bodies, right? And having a normal everyday experience. But like that gets back into that helpless territory. Like if something goes wrong with your brain, like there's not a whole lot, there's not a whole lot that can be done.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're going to end this reboot because we are coming up on time. But I think this was actually a pretty fun discussion.
Yeah, it was fun.
Hopefully, maybe one day we'll reboot this discussion and we'll have an alternate discussion about it. We'll remake this discussion somehow. I don't know how we'll do it, but we're artists. We'll figure out a way.
Yeah.
Till next week, everybody, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one.
Later.